The invisible woman. Hey, have you ever felt completely invisible in your own home? Or experienced that moment when your family didn't notice you? This story will touch the depths of your soul because sometimes the greatest revenge comes from silence. What you're about to hear will shock you greatly. Are you ready for this? Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the like button. My name is Susan Mitchell, and I want to tell you about the greatest lesson I learned at age 68, how I became an invisible woman in my own home and what I finally did to them. But first, let me tell you about that terrible moment I experienced on the kitchen floor that night. I lived in a small house in Salem, Oregon. For 35 years, I had worked as a nurse at the city hospital, night shifts, holidays, caring for patients. I was always a woman who put others first. After my husband Robert passed away, my son David lost his job and moved in with me, along with his wife Jennifer and twin children Mia and Jake. Just for a few months, Mom, David had said, until we get things sorted out. And of course, said yes. That's what every mother does, right? But none of us anticipated that those few months would stretch into 2 years. At first, I was happy to see my home come alive again. Children's voices, running around life. But gradually, everything began to change. I gave them my master bedroom and moved to the small guest room. My preferred tea brand was no longer in my kitchen. In the mornings, I would make my coffee, sit alone at the table, and watch them pass by me as if I were a piece of furniture. David was constantly at his laptop, Jennifer was busy with the children, and the twins only noticed me when they needed help with homework. Slowly, I was becoming a shadow in my own home. But the real turning point happened that Tuesday evening. Dinner time was approaching and I felt a familiar hunger in my stomach. I hadn't eaten anything since lunch and no one had asked me what I wanted. I slowly walked to the kitchen, the sounds of television and children's laughter from the living room filling my ears. I reached for the cupboard, stretched a bit too far to get a teacup, and that's when it happened. A sharp pain in my chest. My breath caught. I tried to step back but lost my balance. My hand reached for the counter but found only empty air. My knees buckled and I found myself on the cold kitchen floor. First the cold hit, then the pain. A throbbing ache in my sides. My head was spinning. I tried to call out but no words came. I heard laughter from the next room. There must have been a funny scene on TV. I heard someone running, then silence. But no one came. Lying on the floor, I could hear the refrigerator's hum, the slight flicker of the fluorescent light above me. I tried to make a sound from my throat, but only a pitiful rasp came out. At that moment, I realized a terrible truth. I could have died there and nothing would have changed. No one would check. No one might find me until morning. This thought shook me deeply. I was ashamed not just because I fell, but because I fell and no one noticed. I turned to my side. The pain was sharp and burning, but I overcame it. I reached for the chair, pulled myself up inch by inch. My hands gripped the table. I stood until the room stopped spinning. The next morning, no one noticed that something had happened to me. Jennifer passed by me while talking on the phone, said I looked tired, thought I had a headache. They didn't see the bruises, didn't question how I was walking. I winced with every movement that day, but no one paid attention. That's when something broke inside me. Not just my ribs, but trust, faith, the silent belief that family would always be there. It wasn't the fall that changed everything. It was the silence and indifference that followed. As days passed, I began to shrink myself even more. I stopped turning on the radio, stopped humming while cooking. I became afraid that even my voice would sound out of place in the house. When I left, no one asked where I was going. When I skipped meals, no one noticed. I wandered around my own home like a ghost, but I was still paying the property taxes, covering the bills. To them, I was just a paying shadow. I started writing in a small leather notebook, my feelings, observations, reminders of who I used to be. The nurse who once managed entire shifts with 3 hours of sleep. The woman who made the neighborhood's best lemon cake. The wife who danced barefoot with Robert on the porch. These words anchored me. One morning, as Jennifer passed by me with a pile of laundry, I realized I was sitting in plain sight, but I wasn't there. Something needed to change, not just around me, but within me. And that's when everything changed. I opened the drawer in my bedroom and pulled out my thick file, edges yellowed but still meticulously organized. Deed documents, insurance, tax, receipts, documents with Robert's and my name written over and over. When Robert died, only my name remained. The house was mine. Next to the notary's ink seal was only my signature. No one else's name, no one else's rights. They had moved into a house they didn't pay for and used it as if it were theirs. Slowly, they had erased me from the center. But legally, on paper, in black and white, the house was still mine. I felt a small flame kindle inside me. The next day, I called my lawyer. I used the library's phones so mine wouldn't be overheard. I made an appointment, took the documents with me. On the bus to town, I looked out the window and saw the streets of my youth. I hadn't taken such a step completely for myself in years. In the lawyer's office, I explained how I lived with my son, how my family treated me, how they had taken over the property. He didn't even blink, showed me my options. He explained how property rights worked, how eviction procedures were carried out. I left his office not with anger, but with assurance. I had documents in my hand and steps to take. That evening, eating takeout at the table, I signed the forms with steady hands. With the weight of each stroke, each signature more certain than the last, I made copies, labeled folders, kept everything in a locked drawer. I hung the key on the chain I wore around my neck. They didn't even notice. They were too busy, too distracted, too confident that I was nothing more than background. I waited another month, quietly, determinedly, legally preparing to reclaim. They had confused silence with weakness, but the paper didn't lie. My name was written in clear ink on every signature line. Finally, that Sunday came. On what seemed like any ordinary day, the house smelled of reheated leftover food. The children were upstairs fighting over a screen. Jennifer was walking around with a coffee cup, complaining. David had taken over the dinner table, hunched over his laptop. I moved quietly as always, invisible as always, but this time was different. I was prepared, documents printed, notarized, signed and neatly arranged in my leather folder. David suddenly turned to me while reviewing bills. In the condescending tone he always used, he asked if I could pay the gas bill this month. He talked about how tight things were because of Jennifer's unexpected expenses. His words poured over me like lukewarm water. They didn't hurt, but they didn't touch me either. I just stood there watching his mouth move. When he finished speaking, I didn't respond. I went upstairs, came back down with my folder in hand. I placed it on the coffee table, sat down, clasped my hands in my lap. David looked first, then looked twice, when he noticed my posture and expression. Jennifer came out of the kitchen and stood at the doorway. I slowly opened the folder, took out the papers one by one and placed them in front of them. My name on the deed, my lawyer's letter, the notarized notice, my final, non-negotiable decision. I watched the truth seep into their eyes, not quickly, but like a slow, cold mist seeping through cracks. First they glanced, then read again. I didn't need to explain. Everything they needed to know was written in black ink. The house was mine. Utilities were being transferred. They had 30 days to find another place to live. And no, there would be no discussion about what was fair. There was a long pause, not from shock, but from lack of control. Jennifer looked at David. David looked at the papers. No one looked at me. I felt strangely calm. This silence was louder than any argument they could have made. The rest of the day passed in fragments. I returned to my room, folded laundry, made tea, watched a nature documentary. They didn't say much. They didn't slam doors, didn't yell. Maybe they didn't know how to fight something so deliberate. Maybe they were just beginning to understand that the woman they had characterized as fragile and slow had never actually left. The following days were marked by a strange silence. David no longer sat at the dinner table. He had migrated to the bedroom, kitchen counter, floor near the stairs, anywhere except outside my room. Jennifer's behavior became erratic, oscillating between helpfulness and sullen silence. They began disappearing piece by piece. Jennifer boxed up craft supplies. David canceled memberships taken from my account. I watched the reclamation movements. The house began to breathe again. Slowly, I moved my favorite chair to the sunniest spot in the living room. I brought the large potted plant from the back porch all the way to the entrance. I dusted off the old record player Robert and I had bought on our 20th anniversary. Nothing was sudden, but the house was moving, and this time it was rotating around me. I spent more time in the garden, pruning dead branches, softening the earth that had frozen during winter. I was preparing space for new things to grow. I cooked for myself again, foods that comforted me. Simple stews, buttered toast, cinnamon oatmeal. I didn't ask who wanted what, didn't check preferences. I was now cooking like someone who wanted to nourish herself. On the last Sunday, I stood in the hallway as they carried boxes down the stairs. I didn't offer help, didn't give advice. I didn't feel vindictive or righteous, just solid, just clear. The day they left came without incident, no ceremony, no slamming doors, no last-minute apologies, no emotional farewells. Just the sound of cardboard boxes being removed, the hollow echo of footsteps on the stairs, and finally the soft sound of a car engine pulling away and disappearing. When the silence collapsed completely around me, like a deep sigh from the walls of the house, I could almost feel it relax. It no longer carried the tension, anger, and weight of unspoken things. I didn't feel lonely that night. I walked barefoot from room to room, reclaiming each one like a forgotten chapter. I opened windows that had made me feel like a stranger in my own home. I left the front door open for a long time, just to feel the movement of air in the hallway. Late that night, I cooked dinner: roasted vegetables, lemon chicken, warm bread. I set the table for one, but didn't feel alone. I poured myself a glass of wine, lit a candle, and ate slowly. In the days that followed, I began filling the emptiness on my own terms. I took down the curtains, replaced them with linen ones that let light in. I ordered a new carpet in a color I loved. I went through closets, drawers, boxes. I gave away things I no longer liked, clothes I wore out of obligation, decorations I never chose, books I never read. I sat outside more often. My porch became my favorite place again. I brought out a small table and chair, planted flowers and railing boxes. Sipping coffee in the morning sun, I waved to neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. I found myself smiling for no reason, just sitting in the silence, surrounded by my things, my breath, my peace. The house didn't feel too big, it felt right. It had never been too much. It had just been filled with things that didn't belong to it. That night I turned off the light, left the window open, and let the cool air in. There were no echoing voices in the hallway, no sounds of doors closing behind me, just the soft tick-tock of the clock and the gentle rustle of wind through the trees. For the first time in a long time, I was completely and openly at home. And no one could take that away from me. So what do you think? Was what I did right, or was I too harsh? Sometimes in life, do you need to take drastic steps to remind others of your worth? Write me your thoughts in the comments, and also mention which city you're watching from. I'm really curious.